AUDA-NEPAD for partnering with IDS to organize this guest lecture. We look forward to a great debate, and we look forward to benefiting from this meeting. As you are all aware, this is a host lecture co-hosted by the Institute for Development Studies and the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD. It's targeting mainly master students in development studies and faculty, but we also know that this is a topic of great interest to students beyond just the Institute for Development Studies, as well as faculty beyond the Institute. So we are looking forward to a great afternoon. And without saying much, I would take this opportunity to invite the Director for Institute for Development Studies, Professor Kanyinga, to welcome and make a few remarks. Professor Kanyinga, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Tieno. May I take this opportunity to welcome everyone to the Institute for Development Studies and the University of Nairobi in general. May I also take this opportunity to thank the African Union Development Agency and the Development Agency and NEPAD in particular for giving us this particular opportunity to co-host this seminar, this talk with us. It's my hope that this is a beginning of a strong partnership with the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, from now going on. And I would like to actually underline that if the agency feels that there are certain thematic areas for which we can host great debates and conversations on the continent, the Institute for Development Studies is the home to come to, and we are ready any particular time. Please tell us the themes you'd like to convene and have discussions on, and we shall be ready to come to host that particular event, particularly because our own students have got a lot of interest on issues of development of the continent. Having said that, let me also say that the topic for discussion today and the numerous other discussions that have been taking place within the African Union Development Agency have been discussions that actually are geared towards transformation of the African continent. We all are very much aware that there is that big debate on the continent today, whether there can be development, sustainable development on the continent without proper industrialization. Some have even argued that conventional industrialization is not what we require. We require technological innovations more than even the traditional ways of industrializing, manufacturing, and so on. But these are debates that are very important for transformation of the Africa's society, so that at least we can have an opportunity to say there are approaches towards sustainable development for people on the continent. Having said that, let me reiterate that should you feel that there is a particular theme you want even next week or week after, please feel welcome to come to the Institute for Development Studies. We are proud to host you. We are proud to have these particular discussions because this is what we have been doing from 1965, providing a platform for national conversations, African region conversations of development, but we don't discuss development without solutions. We don't discuss Africa's challenges without solutions. We request everyone identifying any particular problem in Africa to also identify important solutions to those particular challenges so that we are not seen as people who are not providing solutions to Africa's challenges. Having said that, let me hand over to my colleague again, Professor Tieno, and please feel welcome everyone to this important discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kanyinga, for those very good introductory words. Let me just add on to what Professor Kanyinga said about IDS and the welcome that he has extended for further collaboration and hosting debates. That IDS is actually not new to NEPAD collaboration. The first IPRM exercise in Kenya was actually carried out with IDS as one of the key partners, which looked at the socio-economic development and contributed to the first Kenyan report, which was actually presented by His Excellency President Mwai Kibaki in Banjul. So I think IDS has got a long history of collaboration with the NEPAD, and that actually forms the entry point for welcoming this kind of collaboration. So once again, just to add on to what the director has said, you are most welcome, and we welcome this kind of collaboration. So I move on now to welcome Ms. Boitimelo to introduce our guest speaker for today. Boitimelo, please.
Thank you very much, Prof. Atieno. Thank you very much for everyone to attend our guest lecture. As we know that today's topic is about industrialization. Our guest speaker is a supervisor of Industrialisation Division in African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, and where she also provides support to member states, African Union, regional economic communities, and partners in areas of industrialization. What's more interesting is that this includes developing and implementing key flagship industrialization initiatives with the aim of generating wealth, creating income opportunities, and showcase learning and innovation in key development sectors such as blue economy, ecotourism, extractive industries, and other tradable services. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Bernice McLean to give us a guest lecture with the University of Nairobi. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Boitimelo. Thank you, Prof. Atieno and colleagues for the lovely welcome. It really is a privilege always to be able to I won't say give a lecture, but to talk to people who are developing perspectives, adding to the development of perspectives and narratives on important aspects for Africa's development and future. So I have a background in academics, and I'm used to giving lectures to live people. So this is the first time I'm actually giving a lecture to unseen participants. So just to give a broad round of welcome and thank you for listening to me. I normally also like to ask questions as I go through my lectures to make sure that people are not falling asleep. So if you have specific questions that you'd like to ask, either while I'm talking or afterwards, please do post them in the Q&A function, and my colleagues will assist me to highlight specific questions that might arise or comments on specific aspects. So thank you. This is the first time I'm giving a lecture to the University of Nairobi, although I have many colleagues and friends in East Africa and in Kenya specifically. We have worked previously with another AU institution in Nairobi, so I have been backwards and forwards and really always value my time. I learn a lot from the colleagues and friends from Nairobi. So thanks again, and I look forward to some hearty debates through this lecture. Let me start sharing my screen quickly. Just hold on 2 secs. Can everybody see that? Just trying to get it to the presentation form.
Yes, it's clear.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay. Sorry, let's do that. Okay, fantastic. All right, so just to start off with, thank you for the introduction. As Boitimelo said, I'm the current supervisor of the Industrialisation Division within AUDA, and what we have the unenviable task of taking this new AUDA's newest division forward and contributing to the narrative of industrialization on the continent. I'll speak a little bit more about that shortly. So just sorry, I just want to get rid of my face so I'm not looking at myself while I'm talking. Okay, to start off with, just what I'll be talking about. I believe I've got about 40 minutes, so I'll try to keep it within that time frame. Apologies for going over. That gets us to just before the hour, 10 minutes before the hour. So I'll start with an introduction, and then I'll talk about industrialization and the African Union, why it's imperative to have industrialization for Africa, and then give a bit of an overview of the organization, AUDA. For those of you who don't know us, don't know our history, it's important to just give a little bit of an overview so that you can see where we're coming from and how we're trying to get where we're going. And then in terms of going back to industrialization for Africa, and what it means in terms of Africa, industrialization of for Africa's terms and Africa's terms, and then adapting to the post-COVID context. We all know that we're going through a very difficult time at the moment, and we're hoping to come out the other side. There are some specific impacts of COVID, but also some opportunities, especially in terms of industrialization. And then I just want to end off with a quick overview of Africa Industrialization Week, which happened last week, and to just highlight some of the recommendations that are coming from there so that it drives the conversation forward a little bit. Before I start, are there any technical issues or anything else that we need to take care of, or is everything okay on the hosting side of things? Okay, I think silence is golden, so let's carry on then. All right, so just a quick introduction in terms of industrializing Africa. Why is it an imperative? I think it was mentioned earlier in the introduction that there are conversations about the importance of industrialization for Africa. Some people are really embracing it. Other people are drawing from history and the impacts of industrialization in other continents and nations, and are a little bit, I would say, fearful or critical about it, which is fine. But just in terms of Africa's development, we need to have a definition for Africa and an understanding of industrialization in terms of what conditions can make it a positive experience for Africa, can contribute to Africa's economic development according to our context and our needs and our aspirations. Because some of the conditions that industrialization happened in the past, in the West and the North and so on, those conditions don't exist anymore, thankfully. And so we really need to make sure that we have a process and a narrative that is relevant for our continent, and contributes to the lives and livelihoods of the people of the continent. So yes, there are many lessons from decades-old industrialization experiences in other places in Europe, the USA, more recent experiences in Asia. And there's some very useful lessons to learn from these experiences. However, we need to learn the lessons and apply them to Africa in a critical way that makes sense to us, whereby we need to determine what our pathways are, where our comparative advantages, and what makes sense in terms of having a uniquely African industrialization process. So I think to start off with, we need to recognize the existing narrative and some of the negative assertions that are being labeled on our continent, that we have failed to industrialize or that we are deindustrializing. We need to take a critical look at this, and this is where researchers such as yourself come in, to say, where are these narratives coming from, and what yardstick is being used to measure this, and is it useful? Maybe some of it is useful, but often we need to just realize that some perspectives come from a specific point, and we need to be mindful of that and correct those perspectives if they're not true or needy or useful to us. So just in terms of how we take this forward, we now need to move beyond industrialization for the continent that is really focusing specifically on manufacturing and driven by the utilization of our natural resources, whether it's just harvesting them, extracting them, and the value addition is happening elsewhere, or how can we actually move beyond the aspect that's focusing purely on manufacturing and look broader in terms of what is now being called tradable services, or industrialization without smokestacks is another terms that the Brookings Institute uses a lot. And we have a lot of competitiveness, a lot of innovation on the continent that's not necessarily being utilized to its full advantage at this point. And these are based on issues of accelerated, improved technologies, some of which are coming from the continent and are being embraced elsewhere. But some of them are coming from other places, and we need to learn how to maximize the use of them to our full advantage here. It's also based on the need for an alignment and expansion of a skilled workforce. So we need to look at where our skills lie, where the gaps are in terms of where we want to go, and how to cover those. And again, I think the University of Nairobi, amongst other knowledge institutions and research partners on the continent, have a really essential role to play in this sense, in terms of not only identifying what skills are needed, but also building the skill base for our continent to take it forward. And then the third one is really to align infrastructure development to specific wealth creation and economic development requirements. So obviously infrastructure is quite a big part of industrialization. I would say that industrialization is a destination, and there are many different pathways to achieve it. And we need to figure out how to walk those pathways in the best way possible. So just in terms of the African Union as a whole, there are a few different continental frameworks, agreements, strategies, and targets and aspirations that are guiding development as a whole, but also specifically industrialization. So you may know that we have the Agenda 2063, which is our continental development strategy. It's our kind of a blueprint that has our key aspirations in terms of what the member states want to see happen in terms of the continent and their countries in particular. And this is really identifying these aspirations that we want to achieve by 2063. It may sound far in the future, and I will definitely be a very old person if I'm still around, but I'd like to see at least that we were able to contribute to some of these, the achievement of some of these aspirations before I get too much older. So in terms of other framework documents, we have the most, I wouldn't say, maybe it's the most recent one, which is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, or AfCFTA. If you haven't heard of it, I think it's one of the key processes and exciting things that are happening on the continent. It comes into operationalization from next year, and we really are looking forward to seeing how we can make sure that the benefits from this increased marketplace from the continent can really boost local economy. So it's one of the key frameworks that most of our programs are talking to at this point, whether it's drawing from it or contributing to it. And I'll talk a bit later about the link between industrialization and the free trade area. Boosting intra-Africa trade is another framework document. The key specific one for industrialization in particular is the Action Plan for Accelerated Industrial Development of Africa, or AUDA. This has some really important targets and actions, but it also does need to be revised and strengthened in light of the new context that we're living within, and in light of the rapid pace of technological advancement and innovation on the continent. The third industrial development decade for Africa. This is a global a UN process that is driven by UNIDO and other partners. So they're working closely with us to see how we can push us forward and make sure that partnerships for industrialization really do achieve something, and it's not just a talk shop, but it has some practical outcomes. Then we have the Continental Commodity Strategy, the Blue Economy Strategy, which is brand new, Africa Integrated Maritime Strategy and related environmental strategies and climate change strategies and so on. We have the Infrastructure Program for Africa, PIDA, which is a really strong program. They've got really strong partner support as well, funding and so on. And that's also a key step in our industrialization direction. Then you've got the Capacity Development Strategic Framework, Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy, the CADEP, which is deals with the implementation of the Malabo commitments, which have to do with agricultural production and financing by governments in terms of into agricultural, the agro industry. And many others. I'm not going to mention all of them, but as you can see, industrialization does touch on pretty much all our development frameworks. It necessarily has to. In terms of the selected targets related to industrialization, I won't go through them in the interest of time, but you can see there in the box on the left-hand side, just some of the targets that we are looking at to try to achieve by the timeframes. They are many of them are quite ambitious, and we have to be ambitious. So we need to be very practical, as I said, in terms of achieving those. All right, just a little bit about AUDA. So this is a time frame that shows how we've developed over time. We started off as more or less a project within the Organization of African Unity, OAU, and then got established as a secretariat in 2001. And really since then, we've grown in terms of our, not only our people that work within AUDA, but in terms of clarification of what we do, how we contribute, how we support the African Union and AU structures, and then also our mandate, which I'll come to in a little bit. So we went from a secretariat to a program of the AU, and then to being a specialized implementation agency in 2011. So you can see sort of almost every 10 years or so we have a transformation. And then in 2017, as part of a broader reform process within the African Union, a study was done, which was called the Kagame Report. A steering committee was established with the president of Rwanda leading it, in terms of how do we make the African Union more responsive to implementing the priorities of the continent. And in terms of implementing the decisions that are taken by the heads of state, by the member states. And as part of that report, it was recommended that we are, as an organization, we transform from the NPCA, the NEPAD Planning and Coordinating Agency, so looking at a role of facilitation and coordination, and really transform into a stronger, more legally established institution, which it represents the African Union Development Agency. And so that happened between 2017 and 2018, in terms of getting the legal institutes established, and approvals of the mandates and so on. And in July 2018, we were approved as this technical executive agency and the development anchor for the continent. And then between 2018 and now, really we've been going through a reform process, a restructuring internally, to align our structure of our organization to the key tenets of our mandate and our legal principles, and to really take a value chain approach to how we do business. This is a very quick slide. I won't talk too much about it. It just shows you in terms of where we're sitting within the AU sphere, universe, I'd like to call it. So there are many different agencies of the African Union. You have the African Union Commission, which is the key governing body, and this shows, you know, where we sit in terms of responding to that. Our role is to implement, help implement these continental priorities. But we have a structure that both talks to the AUC and the AU, and is also accountable to our own reporting structures internally. So we are a highly accountable institution necessarily, and we do fall within the AU mandates and rules and procedures. So here we go. This is the new mandate that we have as AUDA. We are looking at 4 key impact areas in terms of wealth creation, economic integration, environmental sustainability, and transformative capacity. So you can see on the right-hand side there, we have quite a large job to do. We're required to coordinate and execute priority projects to promote regional integration towards implementation of Agenda 2063, which I mentioned earlier. We are mandated to strengthen the capacity of member states and regional bodies like our regional economic communities, provide knowledge-based advisory support, and I think this is another area where the university has an important role to play in terms of partnering with us to create, produce the knowledge, create it, and package it in a certain way that makes sense in terms of evidence-based decision making. And then we also have the role of resource mobilization to try to implement these priority initiatives for the continent, and then also to serve as the technical interface with the development stakeholders and partners. So it sounds very simple as I read it out, but it's a big role to bear, and we are trying as much as we can within the current constraints of the current context, the economic conditions and COVID and so on, to try to keep delivering. This I won't go into too much detail, just outlines our core functions. These are legally mandated functions, and they speak directly to our mandate, and it just provides an additional clarity in terms of what specifically we need to do. So to try to get organized and drive our programming forward, we have a strategic plan that is in place from this year until 2023. It's quite an immediate short-term plan, and designed as such specifically to look at the key priorities that we can implement within the near future, the near-term priorities. Because as a new institution, we obviously have to test to see if our model is working, and then we adjust after that. So as you can see, those 4 key impact areas that I spoke about are covered within these 7 strategic pillars of our institution. So you can see industrialization is not mentioned specifically within these key pillars, primarily because it actually cross-cuts all of them, and it is a priority that all our different divisions and programmings need to look at. So within our structure, very briefly, we have 4 key flagship programs that are structured in terms of divisions. So we have the Directorate of Program Delivery, under which these divisions fall, and industrialization is one of those divisions, as you can see, the second from last there. and just talks about the approach that we take in terms of the different impact areas and the services that we deliver based on our mandate. So whether it's technical advisory, fund management, supply chain, monitoring and evaluation, and so on. So within our division, we are a very small group at this stage, but extremely hardworking. I like to say that, if I may. And we have, as our key outcome that we'd like to achieve, is to strengthen the capacity of member states to accelerate industrialization with a specific impact on wealth creation, job creation, and improved quality of life. So you can see those terms are not necessarily traditionally aligned with the traditional concepts of industrialization. They may be inherent in that, but we are really focusing our attention on how we can achieve those three specific aspects and make industrialization relevant and viable for Africa. So within our division, as I said earlier, we are one of the newest divisions within AUDA. So our role at the moment is to try to look at exactly what we need to focus on, and that's what we've been doing for the last year through various studies, through stakeholder consultation, discussion with partners, and development of our program areas. At the moment, we are focusing on a few key aspects. We have industrialization policy and development, and that involves the development of our internal programming, our narrative in terms of what our role is as a division, and how we support the AU member states and others. Then we have a unit on manufacturing and tradable services. As I mentioned earlier, tradable services are really an extension of what it means to industrialize, and it's looking at aspects that are non-traditional industrialization industries. So things like ICT, tourism, agro industries, data and information, those kind of aspects. So within the unit of tradable services, we have some thematic priorities, including extractive industries, which Asia, who's here online with us, is driving. We have tourism, we have the blue economy, which is a massive potential pathway for industrialization. And then we have other aspects such as digitalization and technology, and also some of our partners are partnering with us to look at cross-cutting aspects of SME or micro, small and medium enterprise development within our programming, and a continuous management improvement approach that's supported by our Japanese partners. So that was a bit of a mouthful in terms of who we are at AUDA and why we are taking on industrialization, or how we are taking on industrialization rather. Now the question of why I spoke very briefly about earlier, in terms of the imperative for industrialization. I think through COVID we realized that we need to think about development differently. We are not the pathways that we have been focusing on in terms of Africa's development have yielded some benefits, but have some key weaknesses as well. And this is particularly in terms of interruptions of global supply chains and imports of products that we rely very heavily on. And also the not enough attention on the livelihoods and support structures for informal sector, small, medium enterprises, and our local populations in general. So within that context, we really have an opportunity to extend the conversation on industrialization, and to make sure that it does address these key issues that were highlighted, these key weaknesses that were highlighted in the COVID pandemic and the related impacts and shocks that we all experienced. So with that in mind, and with the upcoming opportunities of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, our industrialization necessarily has to look at pathways with strong multi-sectoral linkages that really support domestic economies and help our countries to grow locally, local economic development, to support the higher growth rates that are not dependent on external supply chains, external imports to the same extent as we were before, and really look at options for economic diversification and transformation on a local level. So the assumption is that this will help to reduce external shocks and will help to support not only the formal sector in terms of SMEs, but also the informal sector to be able to contribute more fully and grow their livelihoods through industrialization. So what this means is that we need an equitable and sustainable industrialization that contributes specifically to poverty eradication through employment and wealth creation, and that is specifically aligned with the free trade area operationalization. So that means local production of goods of high enough quality that can contribute to local and regional markets and really grow a resilient market base and an economy for our continent. So in that sense, we need to look at both the operationalization of the free trade area as well as our industrialization pathways as two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. They're kind of mutually reinforcing. So this what this means is that we need to recognize this fact. We need to get the decision makers to recognize this fact. And to look at options and opportunities in terms of how they can actually take advantage of it. So this will require very specific, deliberate efforts to look at creating enabling environments for our local economies to grow, and also to ensure that whatever pathways we choose are inclusive, which means we do involve all stakeholders to the maximum extent possible, to be able to raise everybody up to contribute to these economies. And we also need to ensure environmental resilience, so that the natural resources that we are using are used in the most responsible way, that doesn't preclude any other industries from developing. So for example, you don't want to develop a giant mine in the middle of a tourism hotspot. So we need to ensure that our planning processes are properly undertaken and proper responsible decision making occurs by our leaders. So that said, it's important, as I said before, to develop a complex or to be comfortable with complexity, because we are needing to diversify our approaches. We need to be very coherent and coordinated in the way we are doing this. We need to do it in a responsible manner, and we need to look at opportunities that not only existing pathways through existing manufacturing technologies and so on can assist, but how do we also take advantage of future opportunities, emerging industries, innovations that we all know that we're very capable of on the continent, and lessons coming from elsewhere. So just in terms of the rationale and benefits, as I mentioned before, this is looking specifically in terms of the free trade area and the nexus between industrialization and the free trade area. So we need to look at how to realize the benefits from industrialization in terms of markets and trade on an intra and inter-regional basis, and acknowledge that this requires a proper enabling environment with very specific requirements in terms of infrastructure and connectivity. Connectivity not only in terms of ICT. I think we all have an immediate reaction in terms of connectivity. Is, can you hear me? You know, are you getting me? Have you got enough bandwidth to get me? but it also means in terms of infrastructure, road, rail, ports, that kind of connectivity, as well as the ability to talk to each other. In terms of, as I mentioned before, looking at the financial contributions to job creation, what the new free trade area will require is for countries to produce, feed and grow local and regional supply chains, so that we cannot be so dependent on the external supply chains. And therefore cross-cutting approach is needed, and that will look at specific policy actions. We need to harmonize our policies to align them, and to inform the narrative of the free trade area from an industrialization perspective. We also need innovative financing, and contributions to human capital development, as well as research and development. And I think that's again where an important role for the research community. So another major realization, I guess, is gaining traction in terms of the involvement of the private sector, that we need to really help to grow Africa's private sector and make them key partners, so that we can develop Africa for Africa, by Africa, and not only be reliant on our development partners. So that's the kind of the basis for where we're looking at in terms of industrialization. This is really just a schematic of some of what I've said already, in terms of what we need for industrialization to speak to the free trade area operationalization and vice versa. So in order to have free movement of goods, capital and people, we need investment in infrastructure, human capital, research development, and a conducive business environment. And in terms of infrastructure, this includes both hard and soft, in terms of energy, communications and transport, ICT, and more recently there's been a narrative developing on ecological infrastructure. So many of our countries and our people in our countries are directly dependent on our natural resources. So that actually forms a kind of an infrastructure that we need to acknowledge, and we need to know how to use properly. This is a bit of a foresight view of where we are potentially looking at in terms of our future, in terms of adjusting to the post-COVID context. This is a foresight study that was done in collaboration with the Pardee Institute in Denver. They use a model called the IPS model, which really looks at projecting based on existing data, global data, basically from development partners and the like, financial institutions, and projects it into the future in terms of what we are anticipating. So you may have seen other foresight analyses done. I think as an institution, we've done a couple in the last few years. We've done one that looks at Africa's key transitions, which is a very interesting read. If you'd like to have a copy, just let me know. It should also be on our website, actually. And then we did another foresight study also looking at the key success factors to the free trade area operationalization, again, which touched on the previous study. And then this study was, this particular post-COVID foresight study was done, I think it was in June or July, in the middle of this year, by our unit, by our division. And really it looks at what are some of the really scary and potentially life-changing pathways that we may be facing in terms of our development context. So what came up was that there are three key factors that are influencing our economic growth and development pathways. This includes GDP, trade, and poverty levels and food insecurity. And you can see the box on the left. Some people get a bit confused by this because it talks about GDP reduction. These are projections on what the impact of COVID may have in terms of our development pathways. So in June, we were anticipating a reduction of GDP by 2025 by at least 1.2 trillion, and then 10 trillion by 2050. We were expecting a dip in our exports as a percentage of our GDP by at least 1.5 percentage points. And for me, the most serious or not serious, but the most impactful figure was the number of people in extreme poverty, which were expected to be up by 22 million by 2022, which is just around the corner, and then up by nearly 25 million by 2035. So these foresight studies are done really to try to give us some insight into what we might be facing in terms of the shocks in the future and how to adjust our policies to try to address the potential impacts. So try to nip them in the bud or mitigate them before they actually happen. There have been some additional sort of relooking at the figures, given the COVID rollout, as you may want to call it, and I think the numbers have dipped slightly, but we are still facing very serious impacts that we need to look at how to address in terms of our policy choices. So the triangle on the right there is really just a schematic to show the three areas that we're looking at, and try to figure out within the space in between, what they're calling the triangle policy option space, how to take a systems-based framework approach to guide our policy choices. And really in the black box there, you'll see that the need for a multifaceted approach to our post-COVID development is very, very necessary. And it's needed to deal with the poverty and inequality, fostering sustainable economic growth, and looking at policies to protect our vulnerable populations in terms of building resilience. So these were all the impacts that we saw, or the key weaknesses in our development plans and pathways as countries, that made the impacts of COVID so much worse, in terms of the weaknesses in the health sector, the lack of systems to deal with the informal sector. A lot of businesses in the informal sector lost out from getting mitigation funds as a result of not being registered. So we really need to have a look at our systems to make sure that as I said earlier, that our pathways are inclusive and sustainable, and we contribute to a resilient Africa in the future. So just to end off quickly, I've got a couple of minutes left. So a lot of our work over the last few months actually has been to co-organize an event that happens every year, which is called Africa Industrialisation Week. It is run by our parent body, the African Union Commission, through the Department of Trade and Industry, who are the leads, and then we come in as supporting technical support features, I guess, or services, in collaboration with UNIDO, the UNECA, and a newly brought on board partner, Afro Champions Initiative. So you can have a look at what they do, just Google them. It's a very, very interesting institution that's just come on board. So what we were working towards actually was to have a formal summit this year. It was supposed to be a physical summit, which has certain implications in terms of feeding into the African Union decision-making processes. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we had to make it a virtual meeting. So the host country, which was supposed to be Niger, opted to postpone the summit until next year, probably in November next year, which means that we have almost a year's grace to prepare for what we really want to say, and to take on board some of the recommendations that were made by by the different partners, by the participants in last week's Industrialization Week. So what it involved, and if anybody's interested, we can send you the links. But there were, I think a few more than 29 webinars for the entire week. We had an opening ceremony and an Africa Industrialization Day on Friday, a high-level event with some presidents from different countries, from Niger, an ex-president from Nigeria, president of Madagascar, and some other high-level dignitaries, talking about the need for industrialization, and also celebrating the fact that we have champions on the continent who are driving us forward in a responsible way. What also came out of these events, we as AUDA-NEPAD, we led on 5 specific events, one looking specifically at the nexus between industrialization and the free trade area, one on regional economic communities and how to develop our regional industrialization strategies so that it helps the member states to develop theirs. One on blue economy, one on SMEs, and a last one on partnership coordination. And then we also obviously contributed to the organization of the whole week and provided input into some of the other sessions as well. So it was a very, very busy week. There's a joint statement that came out that was shared to different member states, and then also a key document that we're finalizing currently that has a number of critical recommendations. I've only put a few here, but I'll be happy to share the recommendations further once they're finalized. And the hope is that these will really help to drive a practical approach to industrialization that goes beyond just talk shops, so that we can drive not only research and knowledge production on the continent, but really to drive forward practical pathways for industrialization. So as you can see, a lot of them deal with consensus, building consensus, establishing partnership platforms, involving the private sector, exploring finance and investments. There's a lot of new innovation in terms of looking at blended financing and all sorts of other financial mechanisms and tools that we can use. Aligning labor with productivity, public-private dialogue platforms, looking at other options, other pathways that are emerging for our industrialization, including ICT, digitalization, tourism, blue economy, extractive industries. How can we really look at those as a whole, as an integrated approach to our industrialization? And one additional point that's coming out very, very strongly this year is the need to look at what they call circular economy approaches or sustainability issues in terms of renewable energy, renewable infrastructure, and environmental and socially sustainable approaches to the development of our industrialization pathways. So there were many, many more recommendations, but I'm not going to go into them for the interest of time. And I think I will end there. If anybody wants to contact me further or my team, you're welcome to. We'd be happy to engage with you and look at how we can work together in future. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Bernice, for that very comprehensive presentation. I'm sure the participants have come up with a number of issues and points of discussion. So I will not make any attempt to summarize what you have said, because I think you have really taken us through introducing the AUDA-NEPAD, its roles, and finally industrialization. So I will go straight to the next item, which is the Q&A session. And I see there are 2 questions, so I'll just read them And of course, if there's anybody also who wants to raise any question, you can also raise up your hand. So I see there's a question here or a comment by Mwikali Kimanthi. She's asking, part of your strategy is the HGS to help Africa in recovery from the COVID pandemic. What HGS have you come up with to strengthen Africa's pandemic resilience within the immediate past? And then Nina is asking, post-COVID, what do you think what do you think are the sustainable development approaches Africa needs to take in terms of the tourism industry? I don't know, McLean, Benis, do you want to respond to those as we look for others?
Yeah, no problem. And excellent questions. Thank you. I'm ecstatic that the issue of the homegrown solutions has been raised. Mikali, I'm not sure what your background is or what your involvement with the HGS is, but I'm thrilled that it actually has come up. So the Homegrown Solutions Accelerator is a specific targeted initiative that we have been developing in collaboration with our partners from Japan, from JICA. That is part of our post-COVID response strategy. And it's looking at, as I mentioned earlier, we have recognized the importance of the support for strengthening our micro, small, medium enterprises on the continent. And this particular initiative, it's in its second phase right now. It was designed and is being designed and developed specifically to look at how can we accelerate SMEs that are contributing to pandemic resilience. So it's focusing specifically more within the health sector. That's not to say that we are only supporting pharmaceuticals and the like. It's actually taking on board finance institutions and ICT technologies that have contributed to pandemic resilience as well. And really, it's a very exciting initiative. We're working with a very accomplished group of consultants who are based in Nairobi, Boston Consulting Group. And they are really helping us to design this accelerator, business accelerator, that will hopefully select a small number initially to pilot this and to see how we can assist them to scale up and provide resilience in terms of both the existing and future pandemics. So really what it has involved so far is a lot of background research to find out what companies are doing in terms of contributing, whether they are producing PPEs or ventilators or specific apps that can assist the initiative or the mitigation initiatives against COVID, and looking also at existing accelerators to see how they have been successful over time, and then to design an accelerator that will be managed as part of our programming, to whether it's providing technical advice, mobilizing resources to assist companies to take one step higher, whether it is helping them to navigate regulatory environments to try to support an enabling environment for companies, and so forth. So we're at the stage now where the design of the accelerator is finished, and we are, since the beginning of November, are now moving into the phase of selecting specific homegrown solutions. So by homegrown solutions, we're looking at initiatives that benefit pandemic resilience in Africa. Whether they're based in Africa, whether they were born in Africa, as it were, but they have to contribute to African SMEs and the pandemic resilience effort. So the pilot is happening. It will finish, I think, mid next year. Well, actually, I think February, but it will extend till mid next year. And then we are looking at how to take the lessons from that, scale beyond the current region, which is your region. It's the East African region that's been selected for the pilot, and then also see how we can extend it to other sectors. So not just specifically within the health sector. So things are going very well. It's been presented to the decision makers at the highest level, and they've requested us to take forward the concept and really expand on it so that we can make it part of our programming over the long term. We also have other SME or MSME initiatives within our organization that are not so targeted. They're providing more of a broad scale support to MSMEs. Through an initiative called 100,000 SMEs, and that's looking to develop a platform and training and all sorts of other things for African SMEs, 100,000 SMEs. And they've already launched, I think, in 5 countries, and are getting a lot of support and technical support and funding to move forward on that. So really our approach within our organization as a whole is to support micro, small, and medium enterprises to boost Africa's economies locally. So that's one initiative. Thank you for asking that question. In terms of the post-COVID tourism industry, this is also a very interesting question. I think from our tourism industry, we really need to look at how to maximize not only domestic tourism, but tourism from the continent. One of the points that came up actually through Industrialization Week when we were talking about the nexus between the free trade area and industrialization was this issue of the diaspora, the African diaspora. And I'm not only talking now in terms of the only people that come to Africa are Africans. It's not true. But one point that was raised that I had never really thought about before was that actually we have an African diaspora within the continent, and we shouldn't only assume that our brothers and sisters are living elsewhere on different continents, but we need to really take advantage of the fact that we are in essence a continental globalized society. And I think this is something that the tourism industry can really benefit from, to grow our domestic tourism industries and our regional tourism industries. And I think for industrialization, what that means is ensuring that we have connectivity, so we have the correct road, rail, air, water networks to be able to allow people to travel. We develop our ICT innovations appropriately so that we are able to sell what we have virtually and make it easier for people to invest in the destinations that they're going to. And I know from my former life, I worked in the tourism industry a little bit. So one of the major issues that we saw in the tourism industry was the fact that a lot of the visitors coming from the wealthier continents and countries would book online and basically pay everything before they got to the continent, and then very little accrued to the destination. So we need to be very smart about how we sell our destinations, how we make the destinations favorable, how we can diversify and not offer the same products to our tourists, and how we make sure that the revenues from the industry actually stay within the locality that the people visit and benefit the local people. So I think more in terms of standards, quality, in terms of local tourism, training our tourist guides locally, making sure that we have safe destinations, and that they are we already have quality destinations, but I think more people can benefit if we have more locally offered products in the tourism industry. So I hope that answers that question sufficiently. Those are my personal perspectives on that, not necessarily those of the institution. In terms of the third question, should I just go go forward and answer the third question. Rosemary, I think let's see, traders in Africa complain about the high transportation costs of moving goods within Africa, particularly air transport, absolutely. Yeah, so this is a major issue, and I think, Herbert, I'm hoping that this is something that the free trade area operationalization will address. You know, there's aspects of rules of origin and financing, whether it's through subsidization to initially develop our connectivity in terms of our physical infrastructure, so that the costs are not borne by those trying to do the trade. This falls specifically within creating an effective enabling environment. So you know, I think we need to look at how we can boost each other as countries and as regions, and not necessarily just try to leverage off each other in terms of what we can earn, and have you know, continental airspace, and how can we partner with each other in terms of air transport to make sure that we are reaching the destinations, and that people are connected. I know particularly within West Africa, it's a nightmare to travel. You want to get from Gabon to Cameroon, and you have to go via France, basically, in some instances. So, you know, we really need to look at mechanisms that can support movement, trade, connectivity, and I think the realization is there. I think COVID, as I mentioned before, had a number of impacts, but it also had a number of realization moments for decision makers that this is really the way to go. We need to support interregional movement and trade, and partner up with each other so that we can really move forward. Then what development prospects do AUDA-NEPAD have in the field of education in Africa in relation to digital education, distance learning? Malap, this is something that we have recognized as a priority. We have a skills, our human capital and skills division is looking very broadly at education and skills to implement that STISA strategy that I spoke about a bit earlier, the science, technology, innovation. So it is, and there was also a couple of webinars last week on digitalization and the need for taking advantage of the digital arena in terms of capacity development, education, and so on. So I think it is the way to go. I mean, there's no way of getting around the benefits of practical hands-on learning, but I think for our continent, you know, this is really an imperative. We need to boost our digital connectivity, because that's the only way we're going to get ahead. And I think it is being realized and acknowledged, and there's a lot of energy around being able to create the frameworks that will enable much more distance learning, distance engagement, distance development, if you want to call it that. So watch this space. It is something that we are looking at, and through our technology division and our infrastructure and our division as well. It's something that we are focusing on. In terms of the agricultural development strategies, what specific development strategies are you adopting to promote industrialization? So I think in terms of agro-industry, there are a number of frameworks for the continent that are driving this discussion. As I mentioned, one of them is CADEP, the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Framework. And within that framework, which is designed specifically to help to implement the Malabo Declaration aspirations and targets, you will see there's specific mention of the need for intensification and industrialization within our agro industries. So they fall within the division of environmental sustainability, the agricultural colleagues, and they also fall within one of the other units, which is called Grow Africa, which is looking at development of value chains and private sector investment specifically in value chains. So I think from the perspective of our industrialization division, we really are looking at how can we promote agro-industry, not necessarily traditional agro-industry in terms of large-scale farming, but also how do we bring up subsistence farmers and small-scale farmers to be more productive, and this includes fisheries and aquaculture as well, to produce more, to have less waste and loss, and to have more value addition. So that's really the angle that we're looking at it from industrialization. So it's the value addition side of things, the improved technologies that will help to improve production and reduce waste and loss. And then how do you take advantage of that value addition through certification, conformity, food safety, and so on. And then our nutrition colleagues take it further. So those are some of the development strategies. Then Marlon is asking, what initiatives have been put in place to ensure that environmental sustainability is taken care of in pursuit of industrialization? This is a very key question, Marlon. Personally, it's something that I care deeply about. I come from an environmental background, much to the frustration maybe of some of my colleagues. I think what we need to do within AUDA, we have a strong environmental sustainability program that is working with member states on different aspects, whether it's mainstreaming environment and climate change into the national development policies, or making sure that the national development, what do they call them in the NDCs, national development contributions, I think they call them, that responding to the climate change issues and aspirations, to make sure that those national frameworks take into consideration aspects of industrialization, but then also what we need to do as into the future in terms of our support to member states in developing their industrialization policies, is to make sure that those policies talk to the existing environmental strategies of the country, and both the regional and continental environmental strategies, whether it's strict environmental, whether it's social, cultural rights, those kind of aspects, ensure that the safeguards are taken into consideration. I think many countries in Africa have systems or frameworks in place at the national level to make sure that environment is taken care of in terms of impact assessments, impact ESIAs, and so on. But I think what we can also do as a development partner to the countries is to help them navigate some of the financing requirements that address environmental and social safeguards, and also ensure that whatever is done with as much information as possible, and also takes a precautionary approach to anything that's going to have a long-term environmental or social impact, so that we make sure that the benefits are accrued over the long term, and that any impacts are mitigated, and that the initiatives are properly planned so that ethically, they're not impacting on the more vulnerable populations or critical ecosystems and habitats. So I think that's the last question. Anybody else?
Yeah, that was the last question. I think, if there's anybody else, we can take up another question. But in the meantime, as we wait for the other for the other question, maybe I can take advantage of being the moderator and ask the question. In terms of adjusting post-COVID, we're talking about the share of exports as a percent of GDP declining. But what about generally as Africa's share of exports globally? How does that affect the post-COVID adjustment?
So I think, this all falls within the issue of the supply chain interruptions. And for anybody who's tried to do any building or any import of export of food or any products, actually, they would have really had a hard time during COVID. So, this is part of the realization that we really depend extremely heavily on imports and exports. I know, like in Nigeria, in the fishery sector, they import more fish than they produce. So, in terms of the export aspects, we know that other countries across the world are some of them going into a second wave of COVID. Additional lockdowns are happening. So it's really created a major issue in terms of our corridors and our networks of trade. Where I heard that the steel industry, there was some issue about exporting steel products and that they were in the wrong place at the wrong time and got locked down. So that's created a 6-month delay on steel imports and exports. So, I mean, in terms of numbers, I don't have them off the top of my head, but it really comes down to the issue of interrupted supply chains and the mechanisms that we need to put in place to be able to both respond to future shocks, whether they're pandemics, whether it's climate change, whether it's social political upheaval. We need to look at how we can address the systems that we depend on for food security, for our livelihood, and for our business development, so that we can make them more resilient. And I think that's part of the conversation of making them more inclusive and more sustainable as well. So focusing on producing locally, trading locally and regionally, so that when the global export supply chains are interrupted, export-import supply chains are interrupted, we have alternative markets. So it's looking at how to build those markets as well. Sorry, Rosemary, I don't know if I answered your question, if you're wanting more of a sort of a numbers answer. I can't give that at the moment, but I can look at it.
No. I think you've just answered. It is not really a numbers. I think it's more of what happens. Yeah, so that's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a question by Simba asking about talking of industrialization that is uniquely Africa. What will be the implications of this to World Trade Organization, which binds many African countries?
Yeah,
and,
very good question.
Sorry?
Sorry, no, that was a very good question. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Victor Didi is asking why is that the government projects are not subjected to comprehensive EIA process as compared to other projects from private firms. So maybe we can deal with those ones, and then I think we are almost exhausting our Q&A time. Yeah.
No problem. Okay, those are two very tricky questions. I can see people are really critical thinkers in this virtual room. So in terms of industrialization that is uniquely Africa, yes, it is a political issue. I think a number of the agreements that we have in terms of global trade do stand to potentially be adjusted or impacted by the free trade area. And there was some opposition to it in terms of the existing agreements by some of the partners. So,
we need to really balance the trade-offs of what is right for the continent and right for us over the long term against the more immediate benefits that we may accrue over the short term. So it's something that, you know, our leaders have decided that it's a priority, and we need to just implement it as effectively and efficiently as possible, in collaboration with our partners. Obviously, we don't want to lose any trade partners. We just want to adjust our development pathways so that they are more inclusive and make more sense for Africa. So yeah, that's a big question. It would actually make a very interesting research topic, Simba. That's a giant hint for you to take that forward. I would be interested to see the results of that study. In terms of the government projects not being subjected to comprehensive EIA processes, yeah, Didier, I'm not sure. I know Kenya is quite strong with your EIA processes in general. You know, I guess government priorities, again, they have to trade off some of the impacts against some of the benefits. But in my mind, you know, it doesn't benefit anybody to shortcut on certain key processes, specifically the EIAs, because it's really talking about the future of the country. So you know, in a lot of places, the environment is still seen as opposition to development. There needs to be a change in narrative about that, which is why I'm actually so excited about the realization that there needs to be a different approach to industrialization that is sustainable and equitable, and that we're not just going for the traditional pathway. And I think it's something that needs to change over time. We or you as citizens need to ask those questions to your decision makers. You know, really the civil society and the research community plays such a huge role in terms of not only a watchdog role, but advising and providing evidence to decision making. So maybe the question isn't, you know, why are they not subjected to it? Is you know, what can you do to make sure that they do adhere to your processes, or if they don't, maybe the processes aren't strong enough. So what can be done to really make those processes stronger and less oppositional to development, but really so that it's taken up into development processes to inform them in an open and critical but positive way. So
yeah, thank you. There's another question, a comment and a question from Dr. Njala, Joseph Njala. There are persistent cross-border hostilities among African countries. These tend to undermine bilateral trade and industrialization efforts. What is NEPAD doing on this? So cross-border hostilities and the effect on trade and industrialization.
okay.
Marlon, your question is not very clear. What is AUDA-NEPAD's take on research? Do you mean, yeah, maybe you can clarify that, but in the meantime, Dr. McLean, the question on cross-border hostilities.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, this is an illness that I think is not only an African illness. It's really something that's a global phenomenon. You know, I always lament that we are a very strange species as a human being. We take decisions and do things that are completely opposite to our evolution and our future as a species. And conflict, whether it's cross-border or internal, is, you know, whether it's politically driven or socially driven, or driven by desperation, indeed an illness that we need to address. I think within AUDA, we don't really have a mandate on peace and security. That falls specifically under the African Union Commission, and they've got specific offices that deal with it. Our approach to the issue, though, is to look at it more as a development issue. So if we are able to help people to develop and countries to develop, the anticipation is that there will be fewer hostilities. People will not be driven by desperation. Our governance systems will be strong enough to deal with issues in the early stages. So, you know, what we try to do is advanced development, food security, economic development, so that people have a viable way of living, and that they don't have to necessarily resort to conflict. You know, it's a global conundrum, and it's often driven by decisions that are taken, you know, high up that people are responding to. It's driven by the narratives that of particular, you know, political narratives that aren't useful for the development of the continent. So certainly from my perspective, well, you know, what we do is focus on how we can improve, how can we add value to development, to bring people up in terms of wealth creation, livelihood, jobs, so that hopefully that will lead to less conflict. But it is something that specifically peace and security is dealt with at the higher levels within the African Union. I hope that answers that question. In terms of the take on research and development in African universities, so I mean, I can answer this broadly from the perspective of industrialization. What we are actually doing at the moment is engaging in sort of a longer term stakeholder consultation, so that we can find out what people are doing in terms of industrialization. And this includes in our knowledge institutions, in the research communities, universities, think tanks, specialists, you know, and really to make sure that the voice of the researchers and knowledge producers are taken up into our narrative. We have I didn't show the slide in terms of our organogram, but we have a kind of a value chain approach to our organization, where we have our different directorates are aligned with the production of or the delivery on our mandate. And one of those mandates, as you may have remembered, was to serve as a knowledge institution, so knowledge production. So research and development is a critical part of what we do in-house, or what we try to promote, or what we try to utilize. We have an aspect or a unit that's looking at creating centers of excellence in different specific areas. You know, climate change, food security. I think there's a couple more that are looking at innovation and so on. So there are different ways in which we both try to support research and development, as well as draw down from and inform. So from industrialization perspective, what we would like to see is the development of longer term partnerships that we can really draw from and inform in terms of curriculum development, so that we can create the necessary skills and answers through research and development that are needed for the continent. The way in which we do that is still open to discussion. And one way, as I said, was through the stakeholder consultation, through think tanks and knowledge-based institutions. But yeah, we have other mechanisms internally within our organization that are taking different approaches. So I hope that answers that question broadly.
Yeah, thank you. I think it does. There's somebody has raised an issue here about the role of regional integration. Regional integration will play a critical role in promoting industrialization. What strategies are being adopted to promote this? So this is a question. I don't know, Dr. McLean, you can answer something on that?
Sure. So I mean, I think that the free trade area is a key one, or the key one maybe. You know, we also as a structure within the AU, we work in terms of the continental organization, and then we also have regional economic communities, and their role is to work also with member states to help to implement both national and regional strategies. So at the moment, as part of the stakeholder consultation process that I mentioned, we are working with the regional economic communities to understand what strategies they have developed in terms of industrialization. And many of them are very well advanced. COMESA, ECOWAS, SADC, you know, they have extensively developed and very well thought out strategies. But they need assistance to make sure that they are both coherent with each other and coherent with the national priorities. So what we're doing is trying to understand what exists and what we can do to help as a both in terms of technical advisory services, as well as implementing key projects, as well as coordinating and possibly leveraging finance for implementation of those strategies. So that's kind of the coherence of regional strategies. But then in terms of other specific frameworks like the free trade area, as I mentioned, you know, a lot of our work is really examining how we can align and inform each other's narratives to make sure that those are taken forward together. So it includes, you know, things like corridor development, standard harmonization, looking at one-stop border approaches, and other, you know, rules of origin and such like. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. I see there's no other comment or question, so I would assume that this has been quite, I mean, people are have exhausted their questions. So you'll agree with me, ladies and gentlemen, that this has been a very enriching experience, very comprehensive presentation on the role of AUDA-NEPAD on industrialization. And the questions that have been asked have helped to actually unearth and you know, strengthen even the discussion. Dr. McLean, maybe we forgot to mention that IDS runs a working paper series. So maybe we would actually request that if it's okay with you, we can work on how this can be transformed into an IDS working paper, but that's something that we can follow up. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah. So I think I want to thank everybody who has participated in this meeting, to our students. I can see colleagues who are here. Thank you very much. Before I hand over to NEPAD to give a vote of thanks, I would like once more to give a chance to our director, Professor Kanyinga, if you can just say maybe something to close this lecture. Professor Kanyinga.
Thank you very much, Professor Tieno. Mine is also to thank Bernice McLean for this presentation. I think it opens a new opportunity to start rethinking industrialization. You remember, I think I began by asking whether conventional industrialization is the process to transformation in Africa, or whether there are other significant changes that we are likely to witness. Mine is also to request you, if there are any other thematic discussions you'd like to have, please let us know in advance. We can line the map for next year's discussions. As you can see, these are our graduate students, and they are raising very important questions. I usually make a joke and tell them it's from these discussions that we raise examination questions. So you have made the work very easy for us.
As long as I don't have to take the exams.
Take the exam, and
no, you don't take the exam. We take it. We'll give it to them on your behalf.
We ask you to help us mark it as a joke anyway.
Sure, no problem.
I don't know whether our colleagues have got any other question. I can see Dr. Ojala there. Dr. Ojala, would you mind to give a vote of thanks to thank our guest, if you can hear me? I saw him sometimes back, but I'm not sure that he's still with us.
Yeah, I saw him. He even raised a question.
Oh yes, you did, yeah. But mine is, Dr. Ojala, you can hear me? If you can, okay. Okay. Mine is to say thank you very much, and let's hope to have a lineup of discussions of similar nature next year. And as my colleague has already said, we would really like to start publishing some of these discussions into working paper series, so that people outside of IDS can have access to them in soft copies or even hard copies. This has been our tradition. We are the oldest institute, I think, in Sub-Saharan Africa on development studies, and sometimes we pride ourselves that we have trained more researchers on the continent than many other institutions, especially in the area of development studies. Let me stop there and say thank you very much again, and hope to see you very soon with other thematic areas for our discussion. We are open to any particular issue that you'd like us to host and have a discussion with our graduate students and colleagues from other departments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kanyinga, for those words. I think I take it back to Boitimelo. There's a colleague, Asia, who is supposed to give a vote of thanks. Asia, please. I hope I got it right. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Rosemary. My apologies, I'm experiencing some internet issues. Well, on behalf of AUDA-NEPAD, I would like to thank you for the very insightful meeting. And I really hope that all our participants have enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I think Dr. McLean, thank you very much for that very incisive and enlightening lecture. Once more, thank you, NEPAD, for approaching us and making our students benefit from this opportunity. I think my director has actually said everything that I would like to add. I can see there's somebody still putting on a chat here. Yeah, so thank you very much. Boitimelo, can I take it back to you?
Oh yes, thank you. Yes, I'd also like to thank everyone who participated in our guest lecture about industrialization. And thank you very much to Dr. McLean as well to give, a powerful presentation about industrialization and what is our role as AUDA-NEPAD. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I think we call it at the end, and we look forward to future many more engagements. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Mm.
Hopefully see you again in the future sometime, maybe physically.
Yeah. Yes, hopefully. Yeah, we pray that COVID goes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so we'll follow up on that paper publication.
No problem. I think also Asia will probably get in touch with you in terms of our stakeholder consultations, because she's also leading on the consultations with the knowledge-based institutions. So we'll definitely invite you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you then. Have a very good evening and a wonderful week ahead. Yeah.
Asante sana.
Asante.